Hi there, everybody. Welcome. Come on in, make yourselves at home. We're going to give everyone a minute or two to join us before we get started. All right, I see people coming on in. Welcome, welcome. All right. We've got a fun topic for us tonight. We'll be talking about. I'm going to wait one more minute, or let's give them the 30 seconds or so because the attendance is filling up continually. So we'll give it a second or two. And then we're going to start up with a little poll for you guys. Ask a couple of quick questions. Get a sense for who you are and the questions that you have. Make sure that we cover your interests. There we go. It should be popping up right now. If you don't mind filling that out for us, that'll help us out a whole lot to help make sure we're supporting you effectively. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that, and then we'll dive in and get to talk about study skills, all the fun stuff that goes along with that. All right, and if you're just popping in right now, if you don't mind filling out that quick poll, we'll get started in a couple of seconds and get talking about study skills. All right, welcome everybody. My name is John Cadenhead. I am the Senior Director of Tutor Services here at Appleruth. My job is to help make sure that all our tutors have the skills and capacities to help support your students in whatever need they have, to make sure that you have the need and the knowledge and the skill to help your students as well, which is what tonight's webinar is going to be about, is study skills. Helping students with actual practical application and recognizing big picture, what are the key study skills that students need for middle school, high school, college, those sort of realms. So if you're a parent, welcome. I've got exciting things for you. If you're a student, welcome. We're actually got some things directly for the students as well. If you are an educator in other capacities, that's awesome too. And I love that you're here. And please, anyone who has questions throughout, please feel free to put them into the question and answer box. I'll answer them as I have moments, and I'll make sure I answer everybody by the end. So feel free to throw all those thoughts in there as we go. And let me click the right places so we can get started. All right, here we go. So we have three main goals for today. One is to talk about learning how to organize your life for the process of learning, understanding what a good method and a good setup is to learn the best and most effectively. We're going to actually look at methods and look at strategies for making sure that we can, whether it be us ourselves or our students or whoever, study effectively. And then we're going to practice them. We're going to test them out. And so speaking of that, here's a requirement that I want you guys to try as we go through this webinar. It is a helpful tool for us to all get more and more comfortable with the process of taking notes. And taking notes, I'm sure some of you guys are like, oh man, I hated taking notes in high school. That was tough stuff to do, but we're going to try it out. So if you got a piece of paper, if you got a pencil nearby, pen, whatever it be, all those things are great. Let's talk about what does it mean to take notes and what do good notes look like. So the most important thing is do not stress that everything I say right now you have to write down. That is not an effective way to take notes. We will be providing a recording of this presentation, so you don't have to stress that, oh my God, I missed something that John said that was super important. I didn't get into my notes. But the process of practicing writing down the things that you take away as important, putting them in your own quick terminology, your own little shorthand, will really help you retain those ideas longer. So I've got a lot of stuff I'm going to say tonight, so please feel free to jot down thoughts, jot down ideas. The key is the key takeaways as you go. One of the things that I'm a fan of myself is the system of Cornell Notes. You may be familiar with this as an idea. It came out of Cornell University. And it's the idea that you take one of these nice, lined papers where you take your notes over here in the blue line section, right? So while you're in class, while you're in a meeting, wherever you are, you put your notes in that section. And then you take that paper home, and later on that night, you review it, you look over it again, and you write down there at the bottom open area your summary, your big takeaways, your thoughts, the things that stand out important to you. And then over there on the extra side, over where you like put your hole punch and everything, you can write key ideas, main topics, headers, the things that you need to be thinking about, big picture. So that as you collect more and more papers, you've got an organization system for them. You don't have to read through all your notes consistently. You can look at each of the summaries to get the big takeaways of what you need. You can look for the cues to find the key things so that you're not having to re-skim every single line again and again and again when you're studying for tests. Cornell Notes, I think, are a really good system. There's obviously lots of different note-taking systems, but that's one way we can think about how to be more effective in our notes. The other thing we talked about is not focusing on trying to write down every single word that a teacher or I or whoever says. That is not an effective way of taking notes. The best way of taking notes is to think about what are the big ideas that they're stressing. How does that relate to me? How can I confirm them or write them down in a way that my brain processes more effectively so I'll retain it longer? And how do I connect it to a real world application or a thought process that I already have? Make those connections between things. When I was in college, I was taking a class from a professor where he, the tests of the class, most students failed them. And the students came up to me after one of the classes and they asked, John, how are you getting, A's on these tests? And I said, notice that Dr. Hermans only writes down 3 or 4 words every day in class. Those 3 or 4 words that he puts on the board are words that he thinks are important. There's a reason he wrote 4 words on the board and nothing else today in class. I wrote down those words. I made sure I studied and understood what those words were. Whereas you're trying to write down everything he says, and Dr. Hermans, God bless him, was very good at meandering off topic. He had his 4 words of the 4 things that he really wanted to make sure he covered that day on the board. And I figured that out and I, took that and ran with it. Figuring out how does your teacher present their information to you in a way that you can retain it, study it, and be effective with it. And an important thing that I stress to my students regularly, and I think this is a great thing that everyone should hear, is the best way to figure that out is to go ask the teacher. Like directly go up to them and say, like, I want to be good at your class. I want to study better. What do you suggest I do? Here's what I have been doing so far. What do you think this is useful? How would you do it differently? A teacher loves hearing that. They want their students to be successful. I can't think of a single teacher who wants their students to fail. And so students who are actively coming in and asking for help and showing what their methods are and asking are there better methods, I can't think of a single teacher in the world who would say, too bad, I'm not going to tell you. Teachers are going to give you help if you ask for the help and if you show that you're competent and you care and you want to be there, right? So I think those are important pieces of the conversation. So what are good qualities of good notes? Well, complete doesn't mean every word, right? But the key information, what are the key things that matter to me? So like going back to Dr. Hermans, it was those 4 words that you wrote on the board. Creative means in your own words and your own thoughts, something that you have ownership to. It's going to retain better if you turn it into your own thoughts. And then connective, building patterns, building relationships with ideas, connecting ideas together so that they're not one random off-topic thing, but they all have their connections. So I've got a few activities in here. Please take a second, think to yourself. You don't have to write magical answers, but I think having the conversation with your brain about these thoughts can be helpful. Where am I academically now? So if you're a student, that's a great question. Or if you're a parent or an educator in a different capacity, thinking about your students that you work with, where are they academically now? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And where do they want to be? What are their goals? What do they want differently in their process that they have? And what's their motivation? What's pushing them forward to continue that process? And your answer may be, I don't think they have a motivation. Well, that may or may not be true. Maybe they haven't found their motivation yet. Maybe they can't clarify their motivation, but I think everyone's got some sort of motivation to become better at things. So think about that for a second. All right. There's no wrong answer to those things. It's just getting in a good headspace for it. But now we're going to pivot from that thought process over to what does it look like to study and succeed? The first thing I always recommend to students in the process of learning how to study better is making sure that you have a specific area, specific space that is dedicated to the studying process. The worst scenario for me is when I talk to a student about their study habits and they say, well, I study in the bed. That is a dangerous place to be. I'm sorry for all you students who are studying in the bed right now, but that is a dangerous place to be because whether you're conscious of it or not, your body intrinsically makes decisions and recognitions of where you need to be brain-wise based on where you're actually physically located. And so if you study in the bed and also sleep in the bed, your body can get confused as to which action you're trying to do, and you can end up staying up a lot, or you can end up feeling like you need to fall asleep when you're studying. And using a space in multiple ways like that can be difficult for the brain. The same way that if you study in the same place you eat, you might feel like you're hungry a lot of times when you're studying. That can be difficult. And so having a specific space that's dedicated as best you can to just the action of studying can make it so that when you sit down in that space, your body already is adjusting to the fact that it is time to study, it's time to focus. So making that space specific, making that space directed towards the act of studying and not 100 other things. And so clearing that space of anything that's not useful to the process of studying can be really helpful. And then the organizational side of it. So making sure that when you sit down to study, you actually have a process there. I know a lot of studying nowadays is done over the computer. So the computer is probably a big centerpiece of that studying process. But if you've got physical books, setting up your process of what you use those books for, where they're located, how you can access them easily, and setting up, I love to set up a to-do and a complete pile because the physical act of moving something from the to-do to the complete pile is so exhilarating. It feels so good to complete a task that having that action is great. Even if that action is just having a list of to-dos that I get to cross off, that is a great feeling. One of the things that I like to do to preemptively make myself feel good as I'm starting a to-do list is I'll put down things that I already did that day and then cross them off right away. And it's a good feeling of like, hey, I already brushed my teeth. I already took a shower today. I've done those 2 actions. Now moving forward, I need to check my email. Right. So it can be a nice moment for you, but having a plan ahead of time, setting up your system to be efficient, that's going to be another big step of the process. And then the next one is building out the routine, committing to the daily schedule. So when I'm working with students with executive functioning, processing and building out systems for them in that capacity, the next thing we do first is we figure out what does their study system look like? Where do they study? We're looking at how organized is the study process? And then the next question is what's the regular routine of it all? Hold on one second, I apologize. Sorry, the funnest of doing webinars from home. I've got a young son who's calling for me. So what was I saying? Building out the regular schedule of things. So figuring out what does my day look like? I get home from school. What are the actions that I'm going to do every day? And learning that first action should probably, other than maybe eating something because you're probably hungry, is sitting down and looking at your to-do list, pulling up your Google Classroom or whatever the system that you use currently to track your homework, and taking all those disparate places where your teachers could be giving you homework and organizing them into one specific place. Building out your action list. And that action list should be the things you need to do today and the things that you need to do for the future that don't necessarily need to get done today, but need to be done at some point. The other thing that I highly encourage students to do in that is add the amount of time they're expecting those things to take. So it's not just a whole bunch of random things. Some things could be 5 minutes long and some things could be 3 hours long, but it's the process of knowing what order that you have and how long it's going to take. Potentially, right? We may not be perfect at that, but knowing specifically how long we're expecting things to take can help us set up a good game plan for that routine. Figuring out breaks in that routine, recognizing when you're going to be eating dinner with your family in that routine, all those different things are going to be important. Having social media breaks, I think, is a good thing, as long as they're breaks and not the regular routine. I'll have a lot of students come to me and say, John, I stay up till like 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why homework is taking me so long. And then when we look at the actual process of what they're doing in the homework, every 15 minutes, they're spending 30 minutes on the phone. That's not effective. in terms of getting their work done. I think that there should be time on the phone, but it should be specific time that's picked out after a task is completed, and it should be timed and time to move on after a certain amount of time is over. Got to click on the right spot. Here we go. Another question I often get is, what does it look like in terms of studying? What's the better way to do that? Is it better to block study and to do a whole bunch of studying of one topic, or is it better to intersperse and mix it up in different ways? So should I spend 3 hours studying for this AP environmental science test that I have coming up around the corner? Or should I spend 30 minutes on AP environmental science, 30 minutes on my history class, 30 minutes on math, going back to 30 minutes on AP environmental science, back and forth like that? And the answer to that question is better to do it mixed. Students will find, and the studies show, if you look at this first little graph, that students who do it mixed don't have as high of accuracy in the practice itself as a student who does a block process of studying for a long period of time. They've had a longer time to process something, they've ingrained more of it in that time period, so they'll do better in the moment. But a week later, students who mix it up will retain it longer than students who block. And the reason is that our brains as humans are designed to retain something for 30 to 45 minutes at a time. And after that, we slowly start to degrade and things fall apart and we don't retain as much. We will retain most of what started and what ended a 30-minute time period, but we won't retain the middle stuff as effectively. So the stuff that I'm telling you in the next 10 minutes are the stuff that will fall out of your brain the soonest. The stuff that we did right at the beginning, the stuff that we do it right at the end will stay longer. And so the more you're getting moments of mixing things up, the more we're starting things and stopping things, right? So starting apes, ending apes, starting history, ending history, coming back to apes, ending apes. Those moments are allowing for more start, stop moments to help. The same way in this presentation, right? I've got an hour long to talk to you guys, but I've split it up into 3 chunks. And so we've got little chunks of like, here's a key thing that we've got some start and stops. Here's another key thing we're start and stop it. It's specifically done for that reason. In terms of a study schedule, there's lots of ways to do it. This is a study schedule I made for a student who studied from home of how to build out their time period, including specific time to do something outside of the actual studying for school, right? So started school at 9, had a 45-minute chunk, did 15 minutes of something different to help them recenter themselves, do something different, get some social media, eat some lunch, stretch, exercise, those sort of things that are important, but also allowed for specific, like I'm committing 45 minutes to this process now before I move on and get distracted by something else. And I think we kind of hit this one too, of like making sure that you know what your to-do list looks like, but also knowing what's coming up in the future and planning ahead for that. I think having like a big monthly calendar can be a really handy thing for students as well, in terms of looking towards the future, because sometimes it's hard to see past this coming week. So with all that said, and with all the other stuff that I'll be talking about, I think it's good to reiterate the idea that it takes about 20 days of continually practicing something to get to a point where you're comfortable with it, where you will do it without having to remind yourself that you need to do it. So if you've ever tried, to set a New Year's goal, like I'm going to go to the gym, and you go for the first week and then you hated it and you stop going, it's because you didn't get through 20 days. You got through maybe 7 or 8 days of it before you gave up on it. And that's what it's like trying a new thing, is the first week you'll hate it and you want to stop. And the second week it feels worse. And the third week you're used to it. And then it becomes the routine. So you have to commit past those first 2 weeks. 2.5 weeks to get to the place you need to be comfortable with the process. So as we're committing to a new process, recognize that we've got to get through, those 20 or so days. Moving on from that, I think the next piece of that thought process is having the growth mindset of, I'm going to recognize that it's not going to be perfect when I first try it. And that doesn't mean that I'm a failure at it. That means that I need to find a way to become better at it. I can learn from my mistakes and I can continue to grow in something. So you're probably familiar with this idea of a growth mindset, but just a quick reminder of it. A growth mindset is looking at something that you struggled in and saying, I've struggled at it, but I can become better at it. I need to practice and I need to do something differently. I need to figure out ways to grow. Whereas a fixed mindset is looking at something that you struggled at and saying, well, I'm just not good at it, so I should give up on it, which is not an effective way to continue to grow at something. And I think the growth and fixed mindsets are really, really helpful to look at metacognitively at your process. But I also think it's important to recognize that we are not inherently just growth mindset or fixed mindset people. We are growth mindset people in certain places and fixed mindset people in other places. And that can be as specific as, I am a growth mindset person in math class unless I hit a wall with a concept that I'm struggling with, in which case I fall back to the fixed mindset and I have to remind myself I need to get back into that growth mindset moment. Right. And so like, it's not just I'm a growth mindset person in math, it's I'm a growth mindset except when these moments happen and I need to catch myself and stop myself from falling into that inner thought process that pulls me down into this I'm so bad at it moment. All right, so here's another fun activity for you. So take a second to think to yourself, where are you in your mindsets? Where do you have a growth mindset and where do you have a fixed mindset? And also, what classes do you enjoy and not enjoy? And do you find that those two things correlate? Of like, I have a growth mindset often more in classes that I enjoy and a fixed in ones that I don't. Take a sec to think about that. I think it's helpful to recognize that because they often correlate, not always, but they often do. And knowing that, like, this is a class I don't like, and also I have a fixed mindset about that class, it's important to recognize that if I could look at it and start to recognize when I fall into that fixed mindset moment and readjust that mindset, it might help me in the class itself. All right, moving on to the next topic. So growth mindset, fixed mindset, all those ideas, we're flushing them forward. We're starting something new. We're flipping our brain. We're excited to talk about how to study. Studying itself is a hard thing to do, right? Sitting down and having to read, 100 pages in a English book tonight for homework. It's not super exciting. We feel probably like this little kid right here on the screen of like, oh, I have to do this again. You're staring at the words. They all start blurring together. You're not retaining them well. You feel like you read the same line over and over and over again. That is what passive reading looks like. Passive reading is not wanting to be actively involved in the process. Your eyes are just skimming over things, but you're not retaining information. The difference of passive reading, you can probably imagine, is active reading. And active reading is interacting, is making decisions on what's important and what's not. And so getting involved into the text itself. Obviously, you can imagine that active reading is a better option than passive reading. But what does it mean to do active reading, and how do we do that, and how do we be effective at it? Well, the short answer to that is you get some sort of writing utensil and you bring it to the text, whether that be actually on the text like we're seeing right here, or on paper beside the text, or on your computer as you're typing as you read, but making decisions of what's important to you. Our body, our brains, learn in three main categories. One category is we learn visually. We learn by seeing things, right? And so unless we're blind, the reason I have a PowerPoint in front of us is so we can see information on the screen and retain it instead of just listening to me talk. The second way is auditorily, so hearing me, which is why I'm also talking and not just putting a PowerPoint up and not saying anything at all. But the third way is called kinesthetic learning. It's the weirdest of the three words. But what kinesthetic means is learn by doing, learn by interacting. And so that's the reason why I told you from the beginning to get that pencil out and to start interacting and writing things down as you go, because then you're making decision on what's important to you. And that thought process, that decision making is active processing, is active reading. In this case, not exactly reading, but active processing. And that's important. The same way when you go watch a movie, or let's say this way, when you read a book and then watch a movie about the book, based on the book, 99.9% of the time, we like the book more than the movie, right? And the reason is because when we read the book, we made our own decisions mentally in our head of what the scenes look like. We got to see the action involved in it. But when we watched the movie, we saw someone else's vision of what it was. It wasn't the same as what we were thinking of. So here's a fun hint for you guys. Nice little strategy is next time you read a fun novel, cast Matt Damon as the main character, so that when you go see the movie and Matt Damon's the main character, you've taken care of it for yourself. It's all good. If that's the only takeaway you have for tonight, then I didn't do my job very well. But here's our terms, right? Visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning. And we learn best by mixing all three together, which is why I'm talking to you guys and we're looking at something and I'm asking you to take notes, because we are going to retain the most effectively because of those decisions. So another activity to think about is when you're reading, when you're looking at information, do you run through these thought processes? How often do you do so? They're good questions to ask yourself. How often do you think of the author's point of view? Do you have trouble finding where you read something after finishing a passage? There we go. That's the sentence. Do you have trouble finding something after reading it, knowing where it appeared in the book? Do you visualize the information as you read it? Do you see it in your head? Where do you do that more, and where do you do that less? Like, what kinds of stories are harder for you to read? And how could you be more interactive with the text? What are decisions you can make to make things more active? Those are great questions to ask yourself, to ask your students, as you're thinking about becoming a more active processing reader. If you're reading on the screen, right? So you're not reading on a physical book, but you're reading on a phone or a tablet or a computer or wherever, some sort of screen. Here's a couple of helpful strategies, because we're doing that so often nowadays. First, put your phone on silent if you're reading something big and you're reading it on your phone, because you don't want all those pop-ups happening constantly. They're going to be very distracting. If you're on your computer, put away the other tabs, close out that your phone or your computer gets all your text messages, because they're going to be super distracting. Put your phone in airplane mode. I think you can do that nowadays. The next one is important. Scroll as little as possible. When we're reading something on a page, on a physical page, our brain is not only reading the words, but it's processing where those words were on the page, right? So we can usually retain, if we read well, we can say it was over here in this area of the page, and we'll be pretty effective at that. But if you're scrolling on your phone, you're regularly resetting where you're looking at something, and it's a lot harder for you to retain information if it's just constantly scrolling. So it's best to put a big chunk on the page, read that chunk, and then scroll that chunk up and read the next big chunk. You actually process more effectively, you retain it longer. It's kind of cool. And then obviously take notes as you can go. If you can take notes in the e-reader itself, that's awesome. If you can take notes on paper, that's awesome too. But getting those opportunities to stop and reflect and take notes, it's that kinesthetic processing that we just talked about is important. And I think we sort of stressed this idea, right? But the more we can reprocess something, the more we can retain something. It goes from short-term memory, which lasts about 30 seconds or so, to long-term memory, which lasts longer. And the more we interact with that over time period of long-term memory, you can retain something for years and years, which is really nice. So here's other questions we can ask ourselves as we read. Why did the author write this text? What are they trying to convince me of? What's the specific section focused on? What are key details I need to know? What sections were hard for me to follow versus easy? What potentially is coming next? Can I predict what the author will care about next? Making decisions like that as you read is a more metacognitive, high-level processing of like what's important to me as I underline, as I circle, as I interact with the text itself. Another question that comes up often is, John, how do I study with flashcards? I think flashcards are great. I think that you can use them more effectively than just the regular way people use flashcards. The best way to use flashcards is to consider flashcards as 3 different piles and not 2. Most people approach flashcards as I know it and I don't know it. And that's a little too binary because it's usually not I don't know it and I do know it. It's usually I don't know it all. I'm kind of getting this one, but I'm not fully there yet. And then I get this one perfectly. This one can be out of my life. And so what we want is we'll definitely start with one pile that as you're looking through flashcards, putting things into those 3 piles. I don't know it at all. I kind of know it. And this one's easy for me. If it's easy for you, move it out. We're done with it. We don't have to worry about it anymore. If we kind of get it, keep putting it back in the pile until it moves to the pile of I got it. Because a lot of students move something that as I'm getting it into the I got it, because they treat it as a binary, either I don't know it at all or I kind of know it. And I kind of know it as the ones that don't retain as well. So continually putting the I'm kind of know it back into the conversation until they move into the I completely got it pile. I think we've kind of hit this one pretty well throughout, so I'm going to keep moving forward for us. The other ways to study it and be useful, testing comes in many forms. There are better ways to retain information longer. One is to teach somebody else. The act of teaching something makes you have to look at something from a different perspective, answer questions that you weren't expecting, and reflect on things in more effective ways. So teaching somebody else, whether it be a peer or whether it be a family member, but sitting down and trying to present information to somebody can help you make sure that you really understand it. Asking yourself questions, asking somebody else questions, that back and forth, forced recall like that is really handy. Studying flashcards is great. Divided notes, similar sort of way of like covering up portions of notes. Self-explanation, verbally walking through the content, those sort of actions are a lot better than just taking your notes and staring at them. When I ask students how they study, that's often the answer of like, I look at my notes, and looking at your notes can mean a lot of different things. So I ask for clarification on it. It's often I skim over the things that I wrote down before. And I'd much rather a world where you rewrite the things you did before into new words. You read your notes and also the book and make connections between the two. You sit down with your friends and you ask questions about their notes back and forth. You quiz them on it. You teach them about it. Those sort of things will retain things and help you be a lot more effective as you go into important tests, like potentially the APs around the corner. And then the other half of it is sitting down and recognizing when a strategy is not working. Recognizing that this book is boring, it's hard for me to focus on, I should probably move on and do a different topic, or recognizing that, hey, the strategy of memorizing isn't working for me. Maybe there's a different way for me to retain information. I remember when I was trying to learn Spanish, it was really tough for me to sit down and do pure memorization. So in flashcards did not work for me. And so I had to mix up a bunch of different ways, including specifically like working with somebody else and having conversations in that capacity helped me retain a lot more effectively than just looking at flashcards. So recognizing, hey, I need a different strategy for this particular class, and that not every strategy, every strategy won't work specifically for all the classes the same way. So basic versus advanced strategies, looking for a main idea, summarizing, paraphrasing, looking up unknown words. Those are great. Those are important. You should definitely be doing those, but we can even pump it up to a new level. So connecting things to background knowledge, making visualizations, skimming the text before reading and taking notes. So planning ahead for where you're going to be going. And then setting goals for yourself. So I like to sit down before I do a big study process of like, what is my goal before I sit down and study? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to make sure I know? And then after I've done the studying, sit back or reflect and say, like, did it work? Do I have that information? And if I have to do this again for my next test, how do I do it better? All right, next big section. So that was about different ways to study, different ways for our brains to process. Now we're flipping our brains again. Woo, here we go, to test strategies. We're going to look specifically at different tests and specific strategies for thinking about it. Before we dive in to tests, let's think about how do we prep our bodies for tests, because we don't want to be that little guy on the screen as we go in. What you have in your body affects how you perform on a test. I think that that's important and hard to recognize, is that taking a test burns calories. You're going to burn yourself out, especially longer tests. These AP tests coming up, if you're taking like an SAT or an ACT, big long tests like that can wear you out. And I will watch students burn out and their stamina just runs out on the day of a test if they aren't preparing ahead of time. So making sure that you have the right kinds of foods in your body. Sugars last 30 to 45 minutes. So eating a bunch of Skittles and then taking a test might work if it's a 30-minute test, but not if it's longer than that. And so if you're sitting down for a 3-hour test, Skittles are you're gonna have the sugar crash at the end of it. But putting proteins in your body, putting carbs, those sort of things can help out a whole lot. Just like you're going for a long run or a sports game or something like that. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting is our bodies feel what happened to us 36 hours previously. So Monday night sleep will affect Wednesday morning's test. What we're doing tonight, if you stay up really late tonight, Thursday, if you have a test, you're going to crash and burn during that test. But if you've ever stayed up all night to write a paper or something like that, and then you felt fine the next day, it's because it takes 36 hours for your body to catch up to you, and then you crash and burn. For it. That's really handy if any of you guys are about to go to college, or if you know someone who's going to college. It's a helpful thing to know as you're getting ready. The next thing to think about as you're prepping for a test and getting ready for it is, what is the test structure going to look like? How do I study for this test? Is it going to be all multiple choice? Is it a long essay? Is it short essay? Is it really I just have to sit down and do 5 intensive math problems? Knowing the language and the layout of the test is going to help me make sure I prepare the right way for a test. I'm going to study differently for a multiple choice test than a long essay test. And I need to know what I should be caring about for that. So what's the format? How many questions? I don't need to know a perfect amount, but have a sense for what that looks like, what types of questions. How much time will I have for the test? Is the whole class period? Will I be able to move from the multiple choice to the essays and back, or do I have to commit to the multiple choice and then commit to the essays? I've definitely had teachers in both of those camps in the past, and so knowing, can I flip back and forth, is that allowed, can be a really handy thing to know. What is expected on me of this test? Is it just what we studied in chapter 7, or is it chapter 1 through 7 that's going to be on this test? Is it really focused on exponents, or is it focused on connecting exponents to all the different things that we've been doing before that? And then how's it scored? Is there going to be partial credit, or is it about, did I answer the right answer, or is it about, did I show the right work for the answer? And then how important is this to my overall grade? If I've got 3 tests tomorrow and I don't have enough time to study for them all, which test is going to affect my grade the most? And which class am I doing the worst in that I need to make sure I'm taking care of, right? So if I have a test that's worth, 3% of my grade in one class where I have a 90, and I have a test that's worth 15% of my grade in a class where I have a 75, my time should be spent towards that 75 test, and recognizing that it's okay if I don't do as well on this 190 test, even if I like that material more, it's more fun to study that. Thinking about, where do I use my time effectively for my studying? Knowing what's allowed ahead of time for the test. Is it a calculator? Is it open notes? Can I bring 1 page of notes? Can I bring a small flashcard where I write the tiniest notes I possibly can? What's my plan of attack for that? And then if it's a virtual test in a capacity, what am I allowed to have and not allowed to have on my desk is going to be an important conversation to be thinking about. Then open book testing. Oh, open book testing. It sounds great. You're excited. You're like, oh, cool, this is going to be easy. I just bring my book with me, but my book is 800 pages long. Am I going to be able to find what I need from it? The best way to approach an open book test is to continually rebuild out your notes till they become 1 page or 1 note card of the key information that you care about. So that open book really becomes bringing 1 page in with you that has the stuff that you have not retained in your head effectively. But everything else that you know and can pull from your head doesn't need to be on that list. So that you're not flipping through 50 pages of notes to try to find the right thing you need, but you've got it organized and structured in a way where you can be the most effective on that test. So like we said, prepare your notes, strategize, simplify, categorize them, make sure they're in order, pare them down to the simplest form. Your note should be your backup, not your primary source. Time management. Also thinking about, in the test, where should my time be and how do I recognize that I'm going too long on it? I've definitely had students a lot who are always like, well, I had a math test, but I only finished half of it. And that's stressful. That's not a fun place to be. So if I've got, 30 multiple choice and 2 essays, and I've got 1 hour to do the things, where should my time go? How much time should I put towards things? Multiple choice questions are designed to be up to a minute max. Like, it's very rare that teachers are giving multiple choice questions where you need 3 or 4 minutes to do one. Right? So don't spend an hour doing 30 multiple choice questions. That should take you maximum 30 minutes to get through. So if I have 1 hour, 30 multiple choice and 2 essays, the teacher's probably expecting you to take 30 minutes on this multiple choice and then 15 minutes per essay in that hour. And so if you were spending 45 minutes on the multiple choice and then you spend the last 15 minutes on one of those essays, you didn't structure your time well, you didn't plan ahead. And some teachers will be nicer about it than others, but a lot of teachers will just say, you should have planned better. So knowing how long it's going to take you, what's your time frame, and then practicing and getting comfortable with the fact that you need to, be able to write a 3-paragraph essay in 20 minutes or whatever it be. Which leads to anxiety, to stress, right? Of like, oh my God, how do I get through and handle this in itself? So students will have anxiety about classes. Think about where you potentially had anxiety, nervousness, getting in your own head, getting the butterflies in your stomach, second guessing yourself, being nervous to sit down, for being a little antsy, wanting to move around a whole lot. Whatever those feelings are, we're going to call it right now as anxiety. And here's the important thing, is that anxiety is actually a really important thing for you, and it can help you out a whole lot, because what it is when you're anxious about something, your body's recognizing that it's important. And if something's important, what that means is your body knows that you need something to help you through it. And so our bodies are designed to handle the anxiety of like a tiger jumping out in front of you. And so we have a fight or flight mechanic, right? We're going to react in a couple of ways to it. But what our body does is our amygdala up here in our brain starts pumping cortisol, which is a type of adrenaline. And so we start getting a lot of adrenaline in our body, which is great if a tiger jumps out, right? I need adrenaline to run. But or punch it in the nose, I guess, but don't do that. But other than that, I need adrenaline in a testing environment too. It can help me because adrenaline, what it does is it helps you think faster. But the downside of adrenaline is that it takes away your ability to multitask. You no longer can do as much in your head at the same time as you could in a calm environment. And so students who don't know that that's happening often see that as, oh my God, I don't know how to do this anymore. I used to know how to do this. Why can't I remember this? And really what it is you used to be able to multitask better and now you can't. And that doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you forgot things. It just means that you have adrenaline in your body. So knowing that's what's happening can really help you sort of get from this distress moment up to like a eustress moment, a calmer moment, a more focused moment, to use that adrenaline to help you think faster and make decisions faster. But recognizing that that feeling in your stomach, your throat drying out, your anxiousness, your adrenaline that you're feeling is doing that specifically for you, and that's important. So as you're thinking about that, think about, well, what do I do in a way where I feel anxious and I'm successful? So a student who is very good at sports, like how do they get past the anxiety of going out on the field and playing the sport? What's the process they do to like psych themselves up and get in the right mind space? And can we recreate that in some way before a big test? Because that same process is useful because you're still feeling the same anxiety, just in a different capacity. We're recognizing the monster and recognizing and pulling outside of yourself as a different thing, as opposed to I'm feeling all crazy. It's my brain's giving me adrenaline. All right. Or, this fun monster Fred here, or whoever he is, that's my brain trying to process around it. And it's not being helpful here. And I can recognize it as something different from my internal self. Finding better ways to refocus around it. So here's a fun one for everybody. As you're sitting here listening to me, everyone, I want you to sit up straight, get your back up straight. Feels good. Take a deep breath in your diaphragm. Ready, everyone? Let's do it one more time. That's nice. What's kind of cool is your diaphragm, when you breathe in like that, when you're sitting up straight, it pushes against a nerve in your back, the vagus nerve, which sends a calming system, push through your nervous system, which is really nice. It actually physically calms you down if you go through that interaction. There's lots of different things we can do with that, right? Of like finding different ways to calm ourselves. But I really like that one. I think it's fun. It's easy to activate. It's a fun activity. So speaking of activity, here we go. Here's a couple more questions for us to ponder and think about to ourselves. When we're in school or when our students are in school, where do we normally feel anxious or nervous? What triggers that nervousness? I'm sure the easy answer is a test, but are there tests specifically that trigger nervousness more than others? Is there a common time of day where you feel more nervous or anxious? Because that often can correspond with food and not having the right food or having too much sugar or whatnot in your body, or coffee or whatnot. Are there high pressure situations that do not trigger nervousness? Why not? What's happening there? How do we reuse those moments in another capacity? All right, our last little bit, looking specifically at problem types and how do we study for different types of problems. So starting off, fill in the blank. So fill in the blank questions. You're looking at a test, right? You've got a sentence, you've got a nice blank in it. You're supposed to fill in a word, fill in a diagram or a map, finish a sentence off. You started it, let's finish it. The big thing that you're looking at is how well you can retain the fact of it. So there's no like description of what you think the word could have been, but you're supposed to give a specific word in that moment, right? So if you're looking at a map, you can't say like, is that country next to Europe that's kind of big and China's in it? You have to say Asia for that map. That's a bad example, but that's the best one I could do off the top of my head. With fill in the blank questions, there's always one tip to remember, one specific thing to think about, which is we want to be specific. We don't want something vague. We want to give the phrase or word that they're expecting. Often a teacher is just looking for that specific word to mark it off as correct or not. Short answer questions, right? We got a little bit more to do. Short answer questions often are and a couple of different things you need to do. Like here, list 2 things that show the Ottoman Empire did this, blah, 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 or, show 3 different, I don't know, it's hard to make stuff up off the top of my head, but they have more than one part. They could be a multi-part definition, a list of examples. Most of the time we want to give complete sentences for this, right? unless the teacher specifically says you can bullet point your ideas for this, I would recommend specific full sentences help out a whole lot. I remember as a teacher looking at students who gave me like half of a sentence, only sharing one idea versus the kid who wrote me the 3 sentences they needed to do for a short answer question. There's a big difference between those 2 things and the teacher's expectation from there. But the other thing that I stress to you is to stay on task and only answer the question being asked. Because the other side of it is the student who is asked to list 3 examples and then list 12 of them, I can see is trying to see if they can get it, like give you more here because they know that they can't do the rest of the stuff. And they often don't finish the test because they're trying to put too much energy into the question here. So making sure you're actually only answering with the question that the authors or the teacher is asking for and not overdoing yourself on it. Multiple choice questions, I'm sure you see those all the time. They're super common because they're easy to grade and we love those. The good news is the answer is there in front of you, but the bad news is that it's often not super obvious what the answer is. And so making sure that you are using a process of elimination to find the right answer. I will watch a lot of students just skim through all the answers, trying to find something they like real quick and finding a word or 2 in an answer that they like and circling it without fully processing the answer. The best thing that you can do for yourself if you find an answer that you like is read the question and the answer together as a sentence and make sure that they actually make sense together instead of saying like, oh, this word looks good in an answer, so I'll circle the whole word. And then the other way around that is if you like answer choice C, let's say, then there has to be a reason why A and B and D are wrong. So you need to take a minute to actually see, well, what's wrong with A? And you may find that there's nothing wrong with A and I need to reconsider C and maybe there's something wrong with C and I'm jumping too quickly at it. In terms of guessing and elimination, that's what we just talked about. Narrow down your options by crossing off words and wrong answers. I like to call those throwaway words, words that just don't make sense contextually. And if you don't know a word or term in an answer, that can feel nerve-wracking, right? Of like, oh my God, I don't know what this word means, or I've never seen this person's name before in a history test or whatnot. The best thing to do is to just put it on pause and look at everything else. Because if you can get rid of all the other 3 answers or however many, then you know that has to be the answer, whether you know that word or not. But if you have another answer that works, then you know that one's not right. And if you have 2 answers where there's one word I don't know and one where I'm not entirely sure if it's right or not, then you got a best guess moment. At least you got it down 50-50. It's okay at that point. Do the best you can and move to the next problem. In terms of math and science, making sure that as you're going into the test, you know what formulas you need to know, finding out if they're going to be provided to you in any capacity. And as you're approaching a problem, the questions that I like to ask myself for any sort of math or science problem, what am I trying to find? What tools do I have? What do I currently know? What do I wish I knew? And how do I go about finding those things? Asking those questions will help you move forward on a math problem, especially one where you're not entirely sure what to do right away. What's my goal? Where am I starting from? And for a regular problem, how would I go about big picture, the steps to solve this out, right? So I would find a percentage of something. Well, what does it mean to find a percentage of something? So what's that formula look like? And now move forward and plug that information in. The best thing you can do for yourself when taking a test is put more on the paper, no matter what class that is. The more you're writing down instead of keeping in your head, the more effective you're going to be. We've already talked about the fact that you can get in your own head about something. And when you're feeling anxious and you've got that adrenaline, you won't retain things as well in your head. And so trying to keep things in your head when it's easier for them to fall out, you're probably not going to be as effective as if you just wrote it down and got it out of your head. In terms of writing essays, we all know we should brainstorm and organize first, but it is important, and it's important to stress. After reading the instructions, and always please read the instructions, start planning out your ideas. Throw them on the paper like we just said. Figure out where you're going to go with it. I love to write down my ideas and then decide the order they're going to hit. So it's usually like 2 or 3 words per idea, right? This is my 3 different things I'm going to care about. Ooh, this one actually works better here. I like to think after I've got my 3 or 4 topics that I'm going to talk about, which ones flow into each other better. So I like to take the ones, and put them in the order so they flow well. If I'm unsure about one and I have like 2 good points and one kind of iffy point, the best place to put that iffy point is near the end, because if I do run out of time, I'd rather get my 2 good points in before time is called than not and get stuck with an iffy point. For most, pretty much every essay that you're going to write, we want an introduction. We want your usually 3 specific points as paragraphs, and then we want a conclusion. And the way to think about it is the introduction tells us where we're going. The body points, body paragraphs tell us the different specific arguments we're making. And the conclusion wraps it all together and says, can't you see how these things are true now that you've read this? And if you have time, sometimes it's hard, but if you have time to review, I definitely recommend doing it instead of putting your head down on the desk. Sometimes you'll see a better way to say your main point, and you want to go back up there. Sometimes you'll see some spelling errors. Obviously, teachers aren't expecting perfection when you're writing an essay under timed structure like that, but I do think that catching something and fixing it is super helpful, and it shows the teacher that you care as much as it shows the teacher that you can do the editing. I've never met a teacher who wants you to fully erase something instead of just strike it out. So just take that pencil and just strike out that line or word or thing that you don't care about. Their teachers aren't going to care once it's striked out like that. You don't have to spend an hour trying to erase something. All right, moving towards bigger long-term projects. How do I plan ahead for a project? Well, that can be really stressful, right? If you aren't thinking, I've got a 5-page paper that's due in 2 days, that's a lot more stressful than I've got a 5-page paper that's due in 3 weeks. If it's due in 3 weeks, you're like, oh, that's so far away, I can't even think about that. But really what we should be doing is this week, we should be thinking about, well, what's my argument and where do I find my resources that I'm going to use to like cite or read or learn about this topic. And then the week after that, it should be the week where we write the draft and we get the 3 to 5 pages, put down on paper, not beautiful, but have the ideas that we need. And then the 3rd week after that is the week that we actually sit down and do the edit. Because if we can block those out in those capacities or whatever capacity it is, right, then we can have, we can turn to someone else for help. We can ask a parent or a student or a teacher to do a proof of the information instead of 2 days before trying to crank it all out and staying up really, really late. So planning ahead with specific goals and specific dates on our calendar that we're going to get stuff done by. In fact, when I'm prepping for a webinar like this one, I use a Google Calendar. So I block off time that I do things, and I'll block off like, this is my prep time for the webinar where I'm going to build my slides out and perfect them. And this is my second prep time where I'm going to review my slides to make sure they make sense another day, right? So I have multiple days where I'm looking at this stuff, thinking about what am I going to be saying and where is it fitting. And I also usually block off time and a half of what I actually expect it to take. So if it is taking longer, I have some safety net. Or if something else pulls me away, I have another time period where I can plug in and be working on it. And writing papers, similar sort of way, right? Set a date for outline, first draft, those sort of things. Like I said, most teachers are happy to read drafts and give feedback. So asking a teacher a couple weeks ahead of when it's due, if they're comfortable with that, and bringing it to them with enough time for them to have time for a turnaround, right? Instead of the day before it's due, asking them to read it that night, they're probably not going to be interested in doing that. But a week and a half before it was due, they'll probably be happy to. All right, so another activity for you guys, reflect on your current classes. What class has the hardest test for you? What makes those tests hard? What class has the easiest test? What makes them easy? What types of tests are harder for you? And what types of tests do you prefer? And what's a strategy we picked up now that we're going to use? We're going to try it out next time. So making a commitment to yourself, I'm going to do it differently this time around. I'm going to study differently this way. I'm going to be in the test differently this way. I'm going to focus better this way. I'm going to be more aware of my time. I'm going to be, outlining before I start just writing. I'm going to study in this different way. Take a minute to think about that and make a decision. All right. And that is my presentation. So I hope it was fun. I hope you had some good notes that you've taken away. Take a minute to look over those too and think about them. Throw any questions that you have over there in the Q&A box. I'm happy to answer any thoughts or questions that you have. And I really appreciate you guys coming out and hanging out with me tonight. As I wait for those, don't forget to check us out on social media. Here's our fun places where you can find information about us. We will keep you up to date in college admissions, in prep, and executive functioning help. We're here to help. All right, I'll hang out for a sec, see if there's any questions. But thank you all for your time. Have a great evening. I got one. Cool. Yeah, so sleep 2 days earlier. It's like kind of a day and a half. It's the 36 hours. Um, so like a student who has something really important on a Saturday, Thursday night can really affect Saturday as well, which is really interesting. Um, yeah, thank you. The chat is disabled. You can do the Q&A. It's harder when things are coming in multiple places, so we just turn one of them on. Um, but yeah, thank you all. Yes, blocks to study aren't as effective long term as mixing it up. If you're studying for something that happens an hour later, studying for a long period of time can be useful. But if you're studying for something the next couple of days or a week later, mixing it up, spending 30, 45 minutes on one thing and then going to something else and then coming back to that topic, the more you're back and forth between something, the more you're restarting the process of relearning it and you're connecting those neurons more effectively. So mixing up is the way to go, I think, for 99% of the time. All right. Have a great night too. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.